Kia ora koutou. My name is James Russell, and if you're here, you've found Mad Surf Stories. I'm a surfer, former journo, and author of surf fiction. There's a bit more about that at the end of the podcast if you're interested. But most of all, I'm an enthusiastic appreciator of a good story, especially if it has surfers or surfing involved. There's a rich vein of stories out there in the surf community, of exploration, heroism, yard sales, wildlife encounters, loose units, disasters, and just general epicness. It's those yarns I plan to mine with Mad Surf Stories, so if you have one or know of one, get in touch by emailing me at james@dragonbrothersbooks.com. Righto, on with the show. Dr. Will Allen, welcome to Mad Surf Stories. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice. No, I thought we would start off just with a bit of your background. You're obviously living in New Zealand, but you're not from here.
Yeah, I'm an undercover Pommy. I was actually born in Christchurch, but I've long since lost any hint of an accent because I grew up in the UK on the south coast, and I've been back in New Zealand for about the last 5 years or so, working in both the North and South Islands.
Right, so Kiwi parents.
No, just slipper contraception whilst parents were working here.
Yeah, nice one. And so you learned to surf in the UK?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I learned to surf at a beach called Witterings, which is in the English Channel, and it probably gets about 10 rideable days a year, and it's normally about waist high. But it was enough. It was enough just to keep the stoke alive long enough to see me through my early teenage years, and then once I got a driving license, I was away.
Yeah, right down to Cornwall and
Yeah, that's it.
places like that.
Yeah, just for crazy weekends as a 16, 17-year-old, which was good fun.
Yeah, right. No surfing parents?
Dad's a keen sailor, so the Brian's always been nearby, and he sails a few nights a week. So I've always been around the ocean.
Right. And you became a doctor when?
I finished medical school in 2016, so it's just coming up for a decade next year, which is very scary. Yeah, I went to Liverpool University, and we would surf on the northeast of England and in North Wales. So there was no real local spots, but we did a lot of sitting in cars and surfing rubbish waves. And yeah, since then, I worked a little bit in the UK, got out as quickly as I could, and then worked in South Africa for a little bit on the Eastern Cape, not too far from J Bay, and then back in Cornwall for a little bit in the UK, and then out to Dunedin, which was my first stop working in intensive care. And then since then I've lived in Raglan for a year working in Hamilton, and then back to Queenstown or down to Queenstown, and then I'm now up in the North Island, Northland. I'm living in Pahia at the minute, and I'm just looking out over the Bay of Islands, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's nice. There's a bit of a pattern there, apart from Queenstown. Good surf spots, all of them.
Yeah. We got a ski season in Queenstown, which was quite fun. And we'd go down and surf in the Catlins a little bit, which was our local spot. But again, it's a good few hours drive.
Yeah, right. Well, I learned to surf in Dunedin, so that's I was
Nice.
down there. That's a special place
Oh, it's
for
such a
me.
special place.
Yeah, but it's not. For those that don't know, it's not for the faint of heart, right? It's cold
Yeah,
in the winter. I think it gets down to sort of 9-10 degrees.
yeah, especially
Um,
some of those north coast spots with the river mouths. I reckon it gets even colder.
yeah,
But I think it's cold water paradise.
yeah. But there's also some sea life to deal with. I've been chased out of the water by sea lions, and
Yeah.
we even saw a pretty decent great white at St Kilda one day when we went out
Oh,
for a
really?
surf. Yeah,
Well,
we,
thankfully, I haven't seen any great whites in New Zealand at least so far.
yeah, yeah. So, whereabouts in Dunedin did you surf most?
Well, I lived at St Clair, like every other doctor in Dunedin, and
There's
most
quite a big surfing doctor fraternity down there, isn't there?
yeah. But the doctors like definitely like St. Clair, and we rented a house up on the hill, which was really cool. So surf St. Clair a lot, but it's certainly my probably my least favorite spot in Dunedin. Surf Blackheads a lot, and then whenever the North Coast spots were on, would be up there. But I'm a real sucker for a lot of driving and trying to find the best waves of the day. So honestly, I've probably surfed most of the spots in Dunedin that I know of, anyway.
Yeah, we don't want you to give any secret spots away. That's for sure. There's plenty down there. It's a lot of coast and down the Catlins as well. I spent a bit of time down there.
So I've heard.
Yeah, nice one. So yeah, we'll go back to that. We'll go back to that day. Will, you were you were due to surf in the South Island Champs. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I did. I did. I mean, I'm not a competitive surfer. I'm not good enough to be a competitive surfer, but it was on my doorstep, so I signed up. And we just did. I think it was the first heat was I was really early in the morning, and I think it was a public holiday. So anyway, I basically got knocked out in round one and had the rest of the day to go surf. And the waves, the forecast was quite good that day. I seem to remember it was 4 to 5 for about 14 seconds on the charts. And with good favourable winds. So everywhere was kind of breaking. So it was quite handy that there was a focal point at the contest site, really, because everywhere else was quite quiet. So we headed south basically after I after I got knocked out of the comp, and we continued our search for good waves.
Who were you with, Will?
So I was with my girlfriend at the time, Michaela, who is also a doctor, and our other housemate, James, who was a doctor, and one of our other mates, Evie, who was a trainee doctor at the time. So we all jumped. I think we were in two vans, and we just agreed that we would go looking for waves in the afternoon. And in Dunedin, it's typical. You either, from the centre of town, you either head north or you head south. And with the winds and tide, we figured that we'd head south. And normally the well-trodden path is to drive from St. Clair down to Tarry Mouth, and you basically just see what you find. And we that's basically what happened, and we just drove down probably about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, looking for
Tyree,
waves.
just for those
Yeah.
who don't know, just give us the rundown on Tyree Mouth there and Tyree River itself.
Yeah, so Tarymouth is it's probably it's a little township about I don't know 25k south of the city, maybe a little bit further. It's a tiny little fishing village, and it's got a massive river mouth. It's a beautiful spot. Most people from Dunedin probably don't never visit because you wouldn't really have a reason to, aside from holiday makers occasionally go. But the waves get good and the fishing's good. And basically it's a massive river mouth, and you've got a right that breaks on the north end of the river, and then occasionally a left will break off the island on the south end. And the whole coast is littered with little fingers of reef, and you would just pull over in the lay-bys, have a look at the waves, and then either get in or carry on. And we pulled up to the lay-by at Tarry Mouth, and the waves were quite good. It was probably there's probably a couple of head high sets, but Tarry Mouth with it being a sandbar river mouth, it breaks so far out. It's actually quite difficult to get a feel for the size, because you're probably looking at sets that are breaking 200 to 300 meters out the back. So it looked like it was good enough to get in, and we basically started. There was no one out. There never is anyone out there most of the time. And we just started getting ready, getting suited up. And then we kind of panned I panned left, just looking out to sea, and we could just see this what looked like an upturned boat. I didn't have my glasses on at the time, and honestly, I didn't really know what it was. I thought it might have been a whale or something. And it turned out it was a dark hull, and it was an upturned tinny essentially. And there was a couple of fishermen on the beach, and they ran over to us and they told us that this boat basically had flipped, and there were people in the water.
Right. Had they come out of the Tyree Mouth?
They had, yeah, they'd come out the mouth, and unfortunately mistimed it, and ended up getting hit bow to wave and flipped.
Right. And is that out the 300 meters where the waves were breaking? So it was a good way
Yeah,
offshore.
yeah, so I actually, without my glasses on, I actually couldn't see anyone in the water. Um, I put my glasses on and you could just about make out these dots essentially in the water. So it was a long way out. It was at that point it looked like it was almost beyond the sets, but then a set came and you could see that they were taking, the hull was taking white water essentially. So obviously once we realized the situation, the seriousness of the situation, it turned from a surf to a rescue essentially. And we just got into our wetsuits and ran down, and paddled out, and obviously it's quite a long way out. And there's a lot of current at Tarry Mouth as well, which is a real challenge because you kind of the boat was being pulled northwards and into basically what were mostly closeout sets. So we probably had about, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 lines of white water to get through to get to the boat. And then with a little bit of current and a little bit of battling, it probably took us, I'm going to say maybe 5 minutes. But of course, in these situations, time goes out the window. You really have no idea. You have no concept of really what's going on outside of your immediacy. So by the time we started paddling and got down into the waterline, I could now see the dots in the water, and to me, they looked like there were 4 dots in the water. Evie, who was on a longboard, she went for the dot which was most south, which turned out to be a little boy. I think he was around about 6 or 7 at the time. So he'd for whatever reason had not drifted with the boat and was all by himself, probably about 300 meters away from the upturned hull. So Evie, so we kind of quickly assigned tasks, and her task was to bring him in, and then James would help her, and then Michaela and I would head for the boat directly where we could see. Well, at this point, actually, it was more 2 dots in the water and maybe a third. After around about 5 minutes, we got there, and I was quite relaxed at the time, honestly. I could see people floating, and it became very apparent that their heads were above water, and I just expected we would essentially just scoop them up and paddle them in. Michaela and I had both done lifeguard training. Michaela had worked as a lifeguard and done a lot more than I had actually. And I guess both doctors have felt reasonably confident about getting them in. From a surfing perspective, the waves were good and it wasn't overwhelming. So I honestly felt relaxed and confident. But as soon as we got closer to the boat, I realised that it wasn't going to be this simple. The mother and father were floating probably about 20 meters away from the upturned hull at this point. And they were delirious. They were cold.
What time of the year was it, Will? Was it winter?
April time.
Okay, it's pretty cold in April, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I think I researched the water temp on the day. I think it was around about 12 degrees,
Yeah, that's
give or
cold.
take. Yeah. So it was cold. We define cold water from a drowning perspective as anything less than 15, really. So they were cold. They were tired. They were unintelligible with their screaming. So Michaela, she had a bigger board. I think she had like a 7.2 or something. She paddled to the mother and father and basically just let them take a breather, sort of resting on her board. And I continued on to the upturned boat, where by this point I could see essentially a massive hair and a head, just poking out above the side of the boat. So if you imagine an upturned boat, and you imagine almost someone's whole body is in the boat, but they've just got their head above water. And unfortunately, what happened is her life jacket had caught on one of her shackles or shrouds on the side of this tinny, and she was unable to free herself from the boat. So unfortunately, she was stuck with basically her chest pinned to the underside of the boat with her head just above water. So,
So she was getting the odd gulp of air. And were the waves still had it drifted out of the wave, the impact zone, or the waves still hitting the boat at this
well,
point?
this was a problem. I think that because the sandbar is it's actually so shallow for so long. I guess that's why the paddle out is so it's so long at Tarry Mouth. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, they were in the impact zone, and there were 14, 15 second sets, so there was a fair bit of juice, and give or take every 10 to 20 seconds, there was a wave breaking, pretty much breaking on the hull, and she was getting dragged down and then back up and down and back up, and obviously, being pinned to the underside of a boat in flat water is terrifying. You know, to be an 11-year-old girl, I'm not sure, how competent in the water she was, or how, her swimming abilities were never found that out. But it's just, the most heinous of situations you can imagine. And she was getting dragged under, and her hair was in her eyes, and she was unable to move her arms. So at this point, we went from my mind went from being a simple, scoop and run and get these guys back to the beach and get them warmed up, to this is someone who is imminently about to lose their airway and die. And it got really real, really, really quick. I basically signaled to Michaela that we had a problem, and basically the mother and father were essentially to make their way in, unescorted, because if they had a flotation device, they had their board. We had someone that was imminently going to drown. Was drowned.
Michaela left the board with them and then swam to you, did she?
She just swam over. So we left the board with them, and the parents made their way in, and basically got washed in, holding on to the board. And the challenge with the little girl was that you realised how much water's moving when you're stuck to a fixed object, or relatively fixed object in the water. And there's water draining into and out of the underside of this boat. There's water moving around the shackles and around her life jacket, and then we're taking waves on the head. And I never really quite realised how far under you can be dragged when you're attached to a boat. But I held on to the girl, and went down with her through all of these waves, because actually I figured that by holding on to her, I wouldn't hit her. So we just we rode it out together. And
yeah, you wouldn't want to lose her either. But
yeah,
I know what you mean. Like any time
oh,
if you've ever gone snorkeling in even a sort of a 1 or 2 foot swell,
yeah,
trying to stay over the top of a rock, you just don't realise how much you get moved around, right?
it was just awful. And basically I was holding on to her, and every time we went down, I was trying to unjiggle her, obviously, or even take the life jacket off, or do anything to free this poor girl. But the real challenge is that she was in a complete fight or flight state, as you'd imagine. So arms were flailing, elbows were flailing. People. It's a well recognised thing that often lifeguards, when they're pulling people in, are at high risk of injury themselves, in terms of people kicking and screaming and fighting for their lives, literally. So it was a real battle with her, honestly, to try to. I mean, I was unable to keep her in any way calm, or in any way not move her limbs, so I could better help her. So that was a real challenge. I was doing everything I could to try and free her, but nothing was seeming to work. If anything, it was getting worse. And Michaela, luckily, was probably about 3 or 4 meters away from us, because we agreed that if we were both in to try and help her, things could get messy quite quickly. So we needed a rescuer of a rescuer. So Michaela basically just trod water and just waited for me to either get stuck with her, or to free her and carry on. I made the decision that basically what we probably needed to do was, as we went down with a wave, was to not try to pull her upwards and to the surface, but paradoxically pull her down and pull her out. I tried to do it.
Free her from whatever
Yeah,
was sticking.
yeah.
When you put your hand up under the gunnel, could you
Mm.
feel anything? Could you feel which part of the life
I
jacket
couldn't.
was?
I couldn't feel anything. Honestly, I mean, you have to take what I say with a pinch of salt as well, because I think the trauma of the incident. I think that my memory is obviously probably slightly hazy in this situation, but I remember having a really good feel around. Couldn't feel anything. Um, there was just so much water moving between the life jacket and the boat that it was just it was almost impossible to just stay there, let alone try and free someone, if that makes sense. Um, So I basically just decided that I could see the top, maybe the top two buckles of her life jacket, which was kind of, like next to her neck at this point because it was all shoved upwards towards her chin. So unclipped a couple of the buckles, which loosened her shoulders somewhat, and then with the next decent sized set, basically as we went under, just pulled her downwards, and I noticed that we got a little bit of movement with a downward pulling. So then the next set just decided just to pull hard. By this point, I should say that things got a lot easier because she went limp. She stopped breathing, and I knew that we had 30 seconds to a minute maximum of before this poor girl probably would her heart would stop beating and she would have a cardiac arrest. So at this point, from a medical perspective, we'd describe it as a respiratory arrest. So she stopped breathing. She was unconscious, but undoubtedly her heart would have still been beating at this point. And that made, honestly, I think it's what saved her life. Saved her life was she went limp, and suddenly I was able to manhandle her in a way in which we could free her. So we went down with the boat, and I think I knew at this point that this was one of the last chances that we might have. So I think that I guess anyone in a rescue situation might find that they find strength that they didn't quite realize they had, perhaps, or anything like that. And I remember just giving the biggest pull down of my life when she came. When the wave hit us, I just wrenched at this poor girl, and for whatever reason, thank God, she just slid straight out of this life jacket.
So the life jacket remained attached to the boat.
Yeah,
She actually came out of it. Wow.
she came clean out of the
That
life
is,
jacket.
that is so heavy, isn't it?
Yeah. And anyway, she came to the surface. We came to the surface together. And then I think before we got to the surfboard, Michaela's my surfboard, which now Michaela was on, we got hit by another wave. And then we basically popped her onto my board, gave her 5 rescue breaths, and then made for shore. And then,
So well, can I ask you,
yeah.
when you pulled her onto your board, did you pull her on her back? How did you do those breaths? How were you
So
able to do that with waves crashing into you and
yeah,
she
I
would be
mean,
sliding around on top of it?
she was. I mean, she was 11, so she was small. She was easy to move. My board was, I think it's a 5 foot, 5'8" fish. I think I was on the day. She was shorter than the board, and basically we essentially just drove the board under her, legs and backside, and then sort of flopped her up on her back. And then I supported her sort of hips and chest, and then Michaela gave her rescue breaths from the side, from the nose of the board, essentially. And we just popped in 5 rescue breaths, and then we got hit by another wave. I think she got washed off the board. We put her back on the board, and paddled her in, and I was at the back, basically just paddling. If you imagine, my chest was probably on the deck pad, and I was just kicking and paddling, and then Michaela was just trying to give her rescue breaths, essentially. And then after, maybe, again, time's hazy, it would have been way less than a minute, but after maybe a couple of waves that had come through, she started showing signs of life. She started coughing and spluttering, and she was moving her arms. And by the time we got her to the beach, she was groaning, and kind of not letting out screams of fear, but just sounds of respiratory effort, coughing, spluttering, moving, things like that.
Do you think her heart would have stopped at any point?
I don't think so.
Right.
I don't know. We didn't give her any. Obviously, in the water, we didn't give her any CPR. I think that I was with her at the time when she was not communicating with me, but she was alive. She was moving. She was breathing. So I think I had quite a clear timeline from that moment. And as soon as she went limp, it was less 20 to 30 seconds maximum before I got her out, and then we got breaths in. So I think it was all quite quick. And I think that we possibly wouldn't have seen such a quick recovery in someone who would have proceeded to cardiac arrest. I do believe. So anyway, by the time we got to the beach, we were, in waist high water. There was a number of people that had congregated on the beach, as always happens in these situations. People driving by, see what's going on. So we ran out with this little girl, kind of, she's small enough just to kind of run up the beach holding her, and popped her in the sand and covered her in blankets and put her in a recovery position. She had a few vomits, and I basically asked who had called for the ambulance. Or maybe I didn't actually. I'm trying to. No, I didn't. I didn't even think to call an ambulance. That's right. I was just so lost in the moment. Luckily, someone else had done that, and I don't think I ever once mentioned about calling an ambulance. You just so lost. That was an interesting one. I remember reflecting on that and being like, good job, someone else thought to call an ambulance. Anyway, I also could hear sirens, and shortly after could hear some sirens. Couldn't hear the helicopter at this point, and I honestly thought that the job was done. I could see the mother. I could see the mother up on the beach. I could see the father standing in the shallows, and I could see the little boy who had done the best out of the whole of the family, and I think he was on his feet. And was clearly alive, and I honestly thought that the job was done. So my stress response, was ending, and I was getting ready to, try to move on and process what had just happened. But seeing the father in the shallows, there's just something I don't know, there's some human instinct you have, and that something isn't right. And he was just looking out of his boat, and my heart just immediately sunk, because I knew in that moment what had happened, and obviously there was a fifth victim.
The father was standing in the shallows, but he didn't come up to his little girl. No,
no.
Was he still looking out to sea?
He was. And this is what obviously I found strange initially, was the fact that a father wouldn't come to meet their unfortunately nearly dead child. So in that moment I knew something was wrong. Luckily for me and for all of us, James and Evie had already cottoned on to the fact that there was a fifth victim, and I could see them paddling back out to the boat. So I picked up my board and paddled out to join them, and I was, I guess, probably, I don't know, 30 or 50 meters behind them. And by this point I was completely spent. I just had nothing in the arms. But I felt like I just felt like I needed to go out and give them a hand, because I knew how, I guess I was the only person that had first-hand experience of just how heinous that, the boat situation actually was. So I paddled out, and I guess five minutes later I got to the boat, and I was met by Evie and James, and James was basically just doing, dives into the underside of the boat to try to find the fifth victim. I could see him from 20 meters away, he was diving down, coming back up with empty-handed, diving down, coming back up, and was basically doing his best just to scour this tinny, which, honestly wasn't that big. But I guess with waves and there being debris underneath the water and all sorts, was just unable to find this little girl.
So
and then,
how old was the girl?
She was two.
Okay.
So as I approached the boat, I was just thinking, well, honestly, my thought was, please, James, pull this person out.
Did you know, as you were paddling out, did you know it was a 2-year-old girl that was?
No, we had no idea. No idea.
James didn't either. He just knew there was one other person.
Just knew there was one other person. And honestly, what was going through my head in that moment was, please, James, pull this person out, because if you don't, it's my go. And I was terrified, honestly. James is 6'8". There's no better guy that you could pick to try to find someone underneath a boat. I'm 5'11" or something. So if he couldn't, I just had no idea how I would be able to. I
diving
think,
under a boat and swell with
yeah,
fishing rods and
oh,
hooks and
just crap everywhere.
rope, and
Yeah,
that's
um,
so dangerous, isn't it?
yeah, and he was, like he was, tears running down. I could just see, the emotion was just so high, and it was everyone was terrified. And anyway, he just as I basically arrive at the boat, he pops out with this, what was it, his a 2-year old child, obviously lifeless, cold, freezing cold. So we popped her onto the Evie had a big longboard, so we popped her onto the longboard.
Was Jane, Will, can I ask, was she in the front compartment of the tinny? Is that where he found her, or
Yeah, yeah, I think so. James and I actually haven't had that conversation in the sense of where he actually found her. I suspect he might not even know in the sense of it was just, the boat was
he felt something and pulled? I guess. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But to me it looked like he was towards the bow of the boat. Anyway, this little girl comes out with a life jacket on. We pop her on the board, and we basically start basic life support. So chest compressions and rescue breaths. So James and I are doing that whilst Evie's paddling, um, um, and we basically just head for the shore and just try to do it as best as we can. One of us is basically holding her away from the waves and keeping her attached to the board. The other one doing CPR, and the other one paddling basically. And then a jet ski arrived out of nowhere, and one of the local guys had seen what was going on and got his jet ski. So we ended up jumping on the jet ski and getting a lift into shore. Um, so so yeah, then we brought her up the beach, and by this point the ambulance staff were there. We continued CPR.
Wow. So if you had to, it's probably quite hard to estimate, but how long do you think she would have been trapped in the boat? Would have been 10 minutes longer, or
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the times with these rescue drownings, the advice, or the algorithmic advice from an ambulance perspective, a first responder perspective, is you start the clock when you arrive. And since we had arrived, I'd say it was at least 15 minutes, at least. Um, and I still to this day I'm not sure how long they were under before the boat had flipped before we arrived and got out. But you
yeah.
know, I,
And is it more likely for a victim to last slightly longer in colder water, or
yeah,
not as long?
it's a good question. We could definitely go through some of those details in a little bit, I guess. But in 12-degree water, it wouldn't quite classify as cold. So you see prolonged survival times typically in water degrees are less than 6 degrees, which the ocean is rarely going to be less than six. Um, but small children, they tend to dissipate heat faster than a big adult. So protective cooling and these protective prognostic factors which we discuss. From a first responder pre-hospital medicine perspective, can increase hypoxic survival time, essentially. Immersion time. Oh, sorry, submersion time. So that was always in the back of my head in the sense of, and I think in the back of everyone's head, that there are these crazy cases that always emerge in the literature where people can be under for tens of minutes. I think the actual record, if that's the right term, is around about 66 minutes for a little girl in Utah in a frozen lake. Was submersed for 66 minutes and made a full recovery. So you hear these stories, and it does inspire you to continue. So obviously at the beach we continued CPR. Ambulance staff gave us a hand, and we basically just followed our usual algorithm, albeit in a wetsuit on the beach. And the helicopter was called at the time. I was working. It is part of my day job doing helicopter retrievals with a heli cruise. So it was decided that I would travel with a heli crew into hospital, and we'd leave the ambulance staff with the 11-year-old girl, to bring her, and then another ambulance I think brought the other family members in.
They must have. Did the mum and dad come up to you when you brought the baby out of the water?
No, no. At this point, I don't know where they were.
Yeah.
Um, I think they, yeah, I can't say. They may have already been on the way into hospital, but I don't recall seeing them. Um,
I'd say the whole thing is. It's probably a
yeah,
bit of a blur, I guess.
yeah.
Strange what the mind does with traumatic stuff like that,
I
right?
think, and also with hypothermia as well. They were really, really cold. Um, I think the important thing to note at this point is that we had a 2-year-old who I was in the helicopter with the ambulance with the heli crew, um, and we were, in our own world doing CPR, but we also had a gravely ill 11-year-old um, who 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 really needed intensive care level support and getting to hospital ASAP. If it hadn't have been a 2-year-old in cardiac arrest at the scene, she would have qualified to fly via air ambulance as well. This was a case where we really probably needed 2 helicopters. So she was transferred via land ambulance into the ED, and was really unwell. Wasn't fully conscious, was unable to protect her airway, which is fancy medical speak for essentially intermittently not breathing, and requiring support with masks and airway adjuncts and things like that. So she was obviously, they were all priorities, but she was a real worry for the ambulance crew at the scene, because it's interesting when sometimes when patients are really really sick, like our 2-year-old, you know what to do immediately because it's a fairly well trodden. We're well trained in dealing with CPRs and things like that, so we just knew we had a job to do until we got into the hospital. But managing a dynamic situation where someone is sometimes better, sometimes worse, drifting in and out of consciousness, sometimes breathing, sometimes not, is a real challenge in a pre-hospital environment, and really challenging to get right. So in some ways, we had the easy job in the helicopter, honestly.
Yeah. I have a little bit of experience in this. My own child went into a pool at 18 months old, and it was the whole CPR and mouth to mouth. So it was, and on that trip into the hospital in the ambulance, he was moaning and groaning, but I had no idea about the risk of you can still drown. Correct, right? Once you're out of the water, and the water on your lungs can still suffocate you.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It's true. There's a historical term called secondary drowning, which we don't use anymore. It's not a thing. Drowning is the only term that we use. But the negative consequences of aspirating water, salt water, fresh water, can have consequences for hours, days, and weeks beyond the time of ingestion, essentially. So to put that in perspective, the little girl we had, who'd be 11-year-old, she was in intensive care for, I think, around about 72 hours, maybe a little bit less. And she required intubation, so she required mechanical ventilation with, a ventilator and things like that. So it does show you, obviously. I mean, it's interesting from my perspective as a doctor, understanding the pathophysiology of drowning and actually what happens to the lungs and breathing system during that process. But it's more than just, at the beach, get them to breathe again and then they're okay. So yeah, and gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that, James. That must have been terrifying and traumatic.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little more. I would like to hear about. You obviously went through a real trauma there, losing the baby, and actually having that baby in your arms for that length of time. You would have felt a connection with that child, having
Yeah,
brought her
yeah,
back to shore. But
yeah.
there must have been some PTSD from
Oh,
the whole
yeah,
ordeal, I'd imagine. And how did that kind of manifest? How
yeah.
did
It
that
was.
affect you, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that honestly, the best advice I ever had was unfortunately my mum died 11, 12 years ago very suddenly, and I remember a friend at the time came up to me and said, "Don't worry, Will, you'll just never get over it. Don't even try. Just work the best as do whatever you can, move on with your life, but don't ever aspire to getting over these things. They're just going to be with you." And I think that at the time it didn't really settle that well with me, honestly, because I think everyone's motivated to try to move on and through these traumatic life events. But it stuck with me, and I'll never get over what I saw that day. I think there's something protective about wearing your scrubs and being a doctor in a hospital with sterile lighting and all the usual furniture of a hospital. It makes you feel safe, but you put a wetsuit on and you're on the beach, and you see a family, and suddenly you're no longer you're no longer a doctor or a nurse or whoever you are with all these protective factors. You're just like another civilian. You're another person, a bystander, and that's all I was that day. I was just a bystander. Um, and I think that seeing things occur outside of hospital, outside of your uniform, I think it hits you in a deeper place than it does if you were in hospital, undoubtedly. Um,
Mm.
so I think there's been a fair amount of digesting and understanding, and of course, you know, the 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 truth of the matter is that I was at that boat with the 11-year-old 5, 10 minutes before. That girl, who knows? She was at least more alive then than she was when we pulled her out the second time, or the first time. Sorry, and that's the grim reality of what happened and what happened. I guess for me, digesting that process is why did I not try to clear the boat? Why did I not think that there perhaps could be another person on board? It didn't cross my mind in any way, shape, or form at the time. Um, and who knows, if I'd have known that there was also a 2-year-old under the boat and you had two casualties, the 11-year-old may not have been freed because I might have somehow prioritized diving for a 2-year-old, and then the 11-year-old, drowns and dies still attached to the boat. So I don't know if the outcome would have been better if I'd have known, because you suddenly have a lot of other factors that are at play in terms of deciding who to rescue, and you know having your focus on one victim was probably really helpful to that 11-year-old anyway in terms of her survival. But of course, when you lie awake at night, you wonder how close your foot or arm was to the 2-year-old when you were at the boat 10 minutes before. And I think that will forever be a dark spot in my memory, in my experience. And I think that it's probably had far-reaching consequences into my working and personal life beyond which I can even imagine, in terms of probably being hyper vigilant to making mistakes or whatever it is, because that was the reality of the day. Is that if I'd have known, and if I'd have, she may still be alive. I guess that's the
Mm.
truth.
Yeah, there's a part of there was a part of me certainly before that happened to my son that it won't happen to me. But I
Yeah,
think as surfers, I don't think I know a surfer, at least of my vintage, that hasn't done a rescue of some kind. Somebody floating past them in a kayak, or a fisherman overturning somewhere. Happens a lot, right? And you've
yeah.
and you've
I mean,
you've
they've done.
taken yeah you've taken this experience and made something positive of it, right?
Well, yeah, yeah. I guess we tried to, yeah. And just on that point, they've done. I can't remember when it was. It would have been in the mid early 2000s, in New South Wales. I think the University of Sydney did a study in terms of bystander rescue from surfers, and they sampled lots of surfers from all different ages, and they came to a rough conclusion that around about two-thirds of all surfers have been involved in some kind of a rescue. And I guess, you know, yeah, as people get older, I guess that can become one, two, three, four rescues. And it's crazy how as surfers we essentially patrol beaches 365 days a year, don't we? There are no real seasons, or we don't clock off at 4:30 in the afternoon and leave the beach unattended in that respect. Not that we're out there for philanthropic purposes often, but the truth is that if anyone's going to be at the beach, like surfers are the highest likelihood of being there day in, day out, and seeing what comes and goes. And I think it's fascinating to me what a resource surfers can be in coastal environments, in terms of the way that they can serve their communities. And for me, I didn't know any of this stuff prior to the rescue, really. I was an intensive care doctor by trade, I guess, but this is all minutiae research in a very specific part of pre-hospital medicine. But obviously it became an interest, and yeah, I guess understanding what a valuable resource as surfers can be, I guess, propelled me into honestly trying to help smooth some of those rough edges about what happened with the drowning. And yeah, we ran some community facing courses with the surf lifesaving, with the board riders in Dunedin, and we basically just held like an evening discussion about the event and what happened, and then did some hands-on stuff in terms of talking about the pathophysiology of cold water shock, of drowning, of basic CPR. And then over the weekend we ran morning and afternoon classes for surfers. They could just sign up for free, and we basically ran surf rescue courses, and we used the help of Surfing New Zealand and Surfers Rescue 24/7, which is an Australian group which basically had their idea was far ahead of mine, if you like, and basically I just used their resources and expertise and delivered what I thought was appropriate education in Dunedin, and for me that was, I guess, a way of trying to give back to the situation, of trying to honour the 2-year-old's death, trying to do my best to say sorry in some ways, I think, but also just trying to find a silver lining, which unfortunately everyone goes through. Life presents you with these moments, doesn't it? And I think that it's not to try to move away from them or to turn around and walk away, but it's to try to front up to what you can do and what you can do better moving forwards, I guess.
Yeah. Tell me, did you ever meet the family afterwards?
I did. Probably about 3 weeks later, we went and we all had dinner. Yeah.
How did that go?
It was good. There was some significant language barriers, which meant that I don't think there wasn't the heart to heart, if you like, that deep contact and discussion and debriefing that would have gone on if we were, if you were all native speakers. But the connection was real. I met them in the hospital as well on the discharge of the 11-year-old, and every time I had a public engagement on the matter, I'd always let the family know that I was doing that. In the early days, it was to ask for the permission to do it. I would just briefly explain what I was planning to do, and then ask for their blessing, essentially, because it's their story. It's not. I guess it is. I was involved, but I understand that it's their story, and it's a very delicate and tragic story. So it was always really tough trying to decide what was and wasn't appropriate. And I love writing. I've done, I guess, lots of writing in my time, just personally, and there's an element of catharsis that comes from it. And for whatever reason, I decided that I think, honestly, just start writing my thoughts down. This was, I can't remember how long afterwards, but I'm going to say 4 to 6 months later, perhaps. I just kind of pieced together my thoughts, and then it was around the time of really this whole Dunedin life saving, just trying to push the weekend, and I just decided that I would try and make coherent my writing and try to approach the New Zealand Herald and other places, and try to tell the story and try to raise some awareness, both of drowning, of what surfers can do, and also for our project and the weekend. And luckily for me, I guess that basically transpired. And yeah, it was quite nerve-wracking for me, honestly, trying to write something which was engaging, and informative and educational, but also respectful, and not just using it as a means to tell a good story. So I think that was a challenge, and I don't know whether I achieved that or not, but that was obviously my intention, was to try to yeah, just be mindful of what happened and respectful. But yeah, that's basically been the process since. And then there's been a number of talks, and we've done a little bit since. And I'm part of Surfing Medicine International, which is not my organisation. It's one of my friends in Hamilton, actually. And yeah, we their primary focus is surfers and drowning and things like that. So yeah, we've done a handful of things over the years, which has been really good fun, and always takes me back to the moment, and yeah, helps me pay my respects, and maybe helps with some rebuilding.
Yeah, I think after my son's near drowning, there was certainly a lot of interest from people that we knew, and thinking I need to take another first aid course and upskill myself. And there'll be people that listen to this that probably think the same. Given that we are in coastal regions during the times of big swells, and making rescues on a regular basis, having
Yeah,
closing the loop by doing that course and being as good as you can, be at first aid is kind of a
yeah.
no-brainer, right? It's
I
what
mean,
you
100%. I mean, if as a surfer you can perform basic life support, and you've got a blanket, or a really thick coat that lives in the back of your car permanently, and you're well on the way to being able to save a life. And that was essentially a core message from us, was that actually none of this stuff is rocket science. It's just about doing the basics as well as you can, and remembering to call for an ambulance. And that was a takeaway for me, that with whatever I had, nearly a decade of medical experience under my belt plus med school, I still probably would have forgot to call an ambulance. And I think that, just hopefully, by people even hearing a story firsthand, it brings to life these concepts, because we've all sat there in some slightly smelly town hall and listened to someone talking about CPR or whatever it is, and you kind of switch off. There isn't that real world application. And I think learning through fear, I don't think is a tactic for life. But engaging people because it could be their child, engaging people because it could be their friend or whatever, I think is what was a useful hook, and will forever be a useful hook in engaging the community.
yeah. How long after that happened did you leave Dunedin? And was your decision to leave anything to do with it, or are you
No.
just a travelling doctor and
Yeah, yeah. So this occurred in April. I left Dunedin the following end of the following January, and I have surfed at Mouth since. I actually surfed the next day after the incident, not near where it occurred. But
it's probably the best medicine, really?
yeah, I just I don't think anything honestly could quell the passion.
No,
But
but I mean, I think every
yeah,
surfer would know that if you're feeling shitty, going for
yeah,
a
yeah,
surf's
yeah.
a, going for a surf's a good option.
Exactly, exactly. So it was both my it was both traumatic and also therapy all at the same time.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, Dunedin. I've since gone back to live in Dunedin afterwards, and Dunedin will always hold a special place in my heart. It's where I'd like to go back to live and work long term, I think.
yeah, nice one. sea lions and all.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's about it. Well, thanks for sharing the story. Um, I read, and I think it was in the ODT that you wrote. It's the Otago Daily Times. Um, as doctors, we have our own graveyards that we stroll through from time to time, and this little 2-year-old is buried front and centre. And I kind of go back to that what you were saying before, when you're in the hospital and you're wearing your scrubs and you feel like sort of protected from it, but also I guess you have all the tools to do your job, whereas you didn't have any of those tools on the beach.
No.
Um, yeah, it's remarkable what you did. It really is. And yeah, I know. I hear you when you say you ask yourself questions. Could you have done this or could you have done that? But without knowing that baby was in there, you know what? There's no way. You did everything you could, and your friend James. That's incredible what he did, isn't it? Incredibly brave.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah. You
like,
must have a strong bond with those people.
yeah, yeah. No, no, we do. I've got shivers that sent down my spine right now. Really, I'm just, yeah, thinking of how brave James was. Honestly, it was a superhuman effort from him, and I'll be forever grateful that he managed to do it before I got there, and my number was called. Because I've honestly never faced anything quite so terrifying. I was close to the boat and experienced getting hit by the waves, but if someone would have asked me to go, swim down and have a dig around on the underside of a hull at that moment, I'd have, I'm not sure what I'd have done. So yeah, props to him. He's a real superhero of this. But yeah, the bond is strong between the four of us. As I mentioned, Michaela, she's now my ex-girlfriend. But it doesn't mean that the connection regarding this is in any way dampened. And yeah, whenever we see each other, there's always an understanding that the ocean will forever, I guess, bind us and connect us. Yeah.
Yeah. And now you're surfing the various nooks and crannies of Northland.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, trying to at least.
Yeah.
I guess if there was just one more thing if I could just add to something, I guess towards the end now. I guess if there was anyone listening who has kids or has friends or even for themselves, I think just a few of the key kind of messages at the minute, which are really making huge headway in the drowning community, if you like. At least in the developed world, the developing world is still is a pandemic in terms of we've got about 250,000 drownings a year, deaths from drownings, but the UK and New Zealand this year has record low drowning levels, especially amongst the young, and I think keeping up the cadence with public health messaging is really important, and understanding cold water shock I think is a huge take home for people, not so much with this incident, but in terms of drowning in general. The majority of people that drown can swim, and the majority of drownings occur within the first seconds of immersion. And cold water shock, as the name sort of describes, if you think of it like water electrocution, like being in a shower, that kind of gasp that you have, that autonomic kind of uncontrolledness, if you like, rapid breathing is often what kills people. And they've done great work in the UK with regards float to survive, and understanding that these huge gasps can result in aspiration, gulping of water. And when we consider that a big gasp, when you hit the water, you probably draw about 2 liters of air into your lungs. Is the toxic dose or the lethal dose of seawater or fresh water on an adult lung is about 1.5 liters. So you don't need to be great at maths to understand that one big gulp of seawater could kill you. And this is actually how 60% of drownings occur, is through this initial gasp. And there was a drowning, or there's an episode in Bournemouth in the UK, not far from where I grew up, last year or a couple of years ago, and they saw on CCTV these kids were floating to survive, and they clearly heard the public health message that actually in this situation what they didn't want to do was panic and fight for their lives and gulp and gasp. Well, obviously you can't help but gulping and gasping, sorry, but trying to keep your head airway above water and laying back and floating to survive, to survive actually, save their lives. And it was magic to see the CCTV footage of these kids actually not fighting this process. And I think that, if we can help educate, the adults of tomorrow into, one, rips, and two, cold water shock, and three, a bit of CPR, suddenly all of these preventable deaths will go away. Obviously, there will always be some tragic deaths, but it's amazing what a little bit of public health messaging can do. So I think that if people want to go away and look and learn any more detail, look up cold water shock, look up basic life support, and you're on your way to surviving yourself, and to saving your family and friends' lives.
Yeah, brilliant, amazing. Thanks, Will.
No worries.
All the very best.
Thanks very much, James.
You're in Pai here for the foreseeable. There's no plans to go anywhere yet.
No. Well, just at the minute of was saving up for a house, canned that idea, decided to buy a 38-foot sailing boat, and are trying to kit it out to sail to Fiji next South Pacific sailing season. So I've got about 7 months to get this boat ready to go to Fiji.
Right. The adventurous spirit is alive and well. Nice one.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks.
Oh, well, you might come back with another story from there.
Well,
Hopefully
hopefully.
not so traumatic. All right, well, thanks,
Cool.
Will.
Cheers.
We'll see you later. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you have a mad surf story or know of one, get in touch by emailing me at james@dragonbrothersbooks.com. The following is a chapter of one of my surf novels. You can listen to the rest wherever you get your audiobooks, including Spotify, Audible, Apple Books and Google Play. Or if you like books made of paper, you can find them on my website at dragonbrothersbooks.com. Just click on the menu and select books for adults. Or you can buy them on Amazon. All the best. Lines, written and narrated by James Russell. Chapter 4. I lose count at 7 pints, or maybe it's 8. Pat, the barman, has locked the door because it's after 11:30. A bunch of people piled in for a late drink, which became 2, then 3, and the atmosphere has changed, charged with a drunken energy. Earlier, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was playing on the TV, and Pat and his old mates at the bar were calling out the answers and mocking each other mercilessly when they got one wrong. A question about Australia came up, and of course they all looked over at me. I gave silent thanks that I knew the answer, and when the bloke on the telly confirmed it, they cheered. It was when Anto came up to the bar for a second time that he found out I was a surfer, and immediately he insisted that I join them, him and Mikey and Brendan. Anto's from Dublin, but Mikey and Brendan are locals. They ask me question after question, and I tell them about my shitty hometown and about all the breaks nearby. Anto gets me to draw the coastline on the back of a napkin and tell him everything about every single spot. Mikey and Brendan are good blokes, funny and decent, but Anto is wild, enigmatic. He listens with wide eyes, as though I'm telling him the best story he's ever heard. Every thought in his mind is telegraphed on his face. His excitement builds like a pressure cooker. When Anto's satisfied that he's exhausted my knowledge of Western Australian surf breaks, he takes over. He's funny as fuck, delivering long diatribes in the manner of the people he's describing. He's a master of mimicry, a student of human behaviour. He starts to mock my accent, and when I say ripper, he immediately absorbs it into his vocabulary, splicing it into his conversation. I can see that Mikey and Brendan are under his spell, and it's not long before I am too. Up at the bar, the TV has been switched off, and one of Pat's friends begins to sing. Anto immediately stands and joins him in a duet across the room. It's an old Irish rebel song, Mikey tells me, and Anto sings it with heart and fire, beating his chest towards the end. They finish, and someone else begins, and then someone else. Pat the barman sings a song that I know from somewhere, and he's halfway through it before I realise it's a tune my mum sometimes hums to herself. I've never once asked her what it was. It's called Peggy Gordon. Pat's voice is pure and powerful, and I actually get a little choked up, but to be fair, I'm well pissed at this point. He brings the house down, which fires up the others in the pub, and a dozen more songs are sung before he closes the bar. It's an amazing night. I've never seen anything like it. Back home there's a shitty, aggressive vibe in most pubs. People start to leave. We make a plan to surf the next day. We're all drunk, and Anto leans into me, conspiratorially, and speaks in an upper-class toff accent. "May I make the bold suggestion that you stay in town for a spell," he says. "It is my firm belief that you could be well suited to the conditions." His eyes are rolling in his head. I've already been thinking the same thing. Besides, I don't have enough money to go anywhere now. "I'll have to find a job and somewhere to live," I tell him. "I'm pretty skint." Pat comes over then and tells us to drink up. "Pat, just the man," says Anto. "Would you ever employ an Aussie? I know they're probably a bit shit, but this young man here is looking for work." Pat shoos us outside. The wind's still howling and the noise from the sea is incredible, but the rain has stopped and we stumble onto the street. Pat stares at me for a while. "Come back and see me on Monday night," he says, and closes the pub door. "Fucking sorted," says Anto.